영어 동화 세상 리틀팍스.
Little Women, Chapter 1. Presenting Little Women.
Oh, hello. Welcome to our home. I'm Jo March, and I'm here to share with you a little about the story you are going to read. As you may know, it is entitled Little Women. It's a story about my family. Well, more specifically, about me and my three sisters. Meg, who is the oldest, Beth, who is a couple of years younger than me, and the baby of the family, Amy. Our story is based on the true life story of the author Louisa May Alcott, who also had three sisters. Louisa May Alcott was born on November 29, 1832. Like me, she was the second daughter in a family of 4 girls. Louisa grew up in Concord, Massachusetts, USA. From a young age, Louisa loved to write. She wrote poetry and even several thrillers, believe it or not. She was also an avid reader, fueling her imagination with works from Shakespeare to Charlotte Bronte. As you read Little Women, you may see a strong resemblance between my character and Louisa. In fact, according to Louisa, she did indeed base my character on herself, while her real sisters, Anna, Lizzie, and May, are depicted by Meg, Beth, and Amy respectively. Little Women was published in 1868. The story is set during the American Civil War. Father is away at war, not as a soldier but as a chaplain. He is a very thoughtful, kind man who instills in us, his daughters, a strong sense of morals and family values. At one time, Father used to be very rich, but now, after the war, our family is struggling financially. Mother is the most loving, caring person in the world. She is not perfect, but she makes every effort to help us girls learn life's important lessons, as well as treasure the moments we share together as a family. My sister Meg is a lovely person who has a strong sense of responsibility and looks after her younger sisters. Meg does have her faults, though, and one of them is vanity. She longs to have fashionable, pretty things, as most girls do. But what can one do if family finances don't permit such treats? Next comes me. As I mentioned, the author Louisa and I share many traits. I am also a writer, and I love to read. I'm not pretty like Meg or gentle like Beth, but I have a very strong personality, as my family will tell you. My biggest weak point is my short temper, and I often lose control of it. It gets me into many arguments and sometimes causes mishaps. But I'm loyal and true to my family and friends. I will do anything for them. I'm a bit of a tomboy, which means I act like a boy. In fact, I'll admit I sometimes wish I were a boy. This kind of thinking also gets me into trouble. Beth is my darling little sister. I have a soft spot for her as she is the most gentle and shy creature you will ever come across. Like Mother, Beth is very caring and she holds nothing back when it comes to helping others. Beth never complains or upsets people, and she would rather do something herself than be a bother to others. She loves music. Her voice is as angelic as her personality. Finally, there's Amy, the youngest of our clan. I suppose Amy and I are the pair of sisters who argue the most. Just between you and me, she irritates me so. However, I admit Amy does have her good traits. One of them is her beauty. She is like a porcelain doll. When she smiles at you, you forget all your troubles. She is also a very talented artist. I wouldn't be surprised if she became a famous painter one day. One of Amy's weaknesses is her selfishness. She's the youngest, so I can understand this somewhat. But this characteristic gets her into several scrapes, which Amy thankfully learns from. So now you know a little about my family and something about Louisa May Alcott. As I mentioned before, our family lived during the American Civil War. Life at that time was quite different from what it is like for you today. For example, look at my clothes. Not only did we have to wear these long dresses, but when a woman went out, she was expected to wear gloves and carry a parasol. Given that I'm a tomboy, can you imagine how difficult it was for me to wear such things? My sisters had to remind me every time I wasn't dressed in a ladylike way. At this time, women were expected to behave in a certain manner as well. For most women, their purpose in life consisted of finding a marriage mate and having children. I resisted such notions and got myself into a lot of trouble for it. But I, like Louisa, am a firm believer that women should have their independence. Another thing you might find unusual is our way of life. It was common in our time to have servants and housekeepers. My family, as well as Louisa Alcott, hated the idea of slavery. We would never regard our beloved Hannah as a slave. She is trusted and loved, and is a great help to our family. Something else you may find peculiar is how the young men and women interact. In my day, society was much more conservative. It was not considered proper for young people to date or go out unless they intended to marry. It's true that many married at a young age, but we had strict rules that allowed or did not allow certain behaviors. Time is constantly changing, and that can't be helped. Fashions, manners, customs, and traditions change too. Some things, however, are timeless. Learning how to grow up, learning how to deal with family issues, learning to love and respect others, and of course, most important of all, learning who you are. Little Women is a story about just those things. Even though it was written more than 100 years ago, I hope that you will find lessons you can learn from and apply in your life today.
Little Women, Chapter 2, The True Meaning of Giving. The crackling from the fireplace gave the impression that all was well in the march home. Another crackling sound, that of Jo pushing down on her knuckles, told a different story.
Ugh, I wish this bothersome snow would stop.
Jo banged the window as she watched the gigantic snowflakes silently piling up on the ground.
Joe!
Shrieked Amy.
That's so unladylike.
Amy smoothed her dress and caressed her curls. She could not stand it when her older sister acted like a boy. Jo, on the other hand, wished she could be a boy. She often complained,
Why do I have to wear this confining dress? Why can't I wear trousers and kick my legs up and gallop around freely like a horse?
Whenever Jo said such things, her older sister Meg would gently shake her head and say,
Because whether you like it or not, you are a girl, and girls should behave as such.
On this cold winter day, however, Meg did not scold her tomboy sister. In fact, she agreed with Jo about the endlessly falling snow.
It's so cold and miserable.
Meg lamented.
When we were rich, we could warm up every room in the house.
Now the only room that was heated was the living room in which they sat.
We didn't have to wear these unbecoming sweaters.
Amy turned up her nose as if her sweater had a funny smell.
Now our concerns are about how Father is faring under these treacherous conditions,
Added Jo. She stomped over to the fireplace and rubbed her large hands together vigorously. Being over the age at which men could enlist in the army, Father had volunteered his services as a clergyman. The girls were too young to understand or to care what the Civil War was about. They only wanted it to end so Father could return home. At one time, the March family had been very wealthy. Meg and Joe, the two oldest girls, could remember a time when they received many gifts all year round. Now they didn't have enough money to buy even Christmas gifts for each other.
If you had $5,
Joe began. At this period of time, $5 was a lot of money.
if you had $5,
Joe repeated.
what would you buy?
The girls fell silent as their eyes grew bigger with fanciful thoughts.
I know what I would buy.
Amy gushed at last. Her sisters turned to her,
Go on.
urged Joe. Amy's cheeks got pink, and she pressed her hands together excitedly.
I would buy a new set of watercolors.
She said.
And then I would buy 2 new hairpins, one red with silver butterflies like my best friend Kitty has, and the other blue like my eyes.
As for me,
Meg said.
I would buy beautiful silk material for a new dress. Maybe I would have some money left over for gloves since I desperately need new ones.
Meg held up her lovely hands, which were now pinkish red from the cold. Meg had many vanities, but she took special pride in her hands.
I
Joe blurted in a loud, comical voice.
would buy 4 bottles of black ink, a case of pens, 20 rolls of paper, and 300...
She paused for dramatic emphasis.
300
She repeated again.
leather cases for all the books I'm going to publish.
Joe dreamed of being a writer. Nothing suited her more than to sit at her desk and enter a world of make-believe and fantasy.
You can't afford that many leather cases with only $5. That's ridiculous.
Amy pointed out.
Well, so is this game.
Joe retorted.
Because none of us actually has $5.
Girls,
Meg said in her motherly voice.
do stop arguing. You're behaving like children. Now, Beth, let's hear what you would do if you had $5.
Beth had a far-away look in her eyes. She was smiling.
First of all, I'd buy a new pair of slippers for Mother. I noticed her old ones have several small holes in them.
Beth said in her gentle, quiet way. The other girls glanced at the familiar slippers next to the sofa. They all felt rather guilty when they saw that the well-worn slippers did indeed have many holes.
And then, I would buy Father a new scarf and hat in his favorite color.
Beth continued.
If I had money left over, I would get each of you girls a handkerchief with your name on it. And one for Hannah, too.
Of the 4 girls, Beth was by far the kindest and most loving. She never said a bad word about anyone, nor did she ever complain. She had a positive view of everything and everyone.
Oh, Beth,
Joe ran over and wrapped her arms around her sister.
you make me feel so ashamed. Here I am thinking of myself, but you...
She sniffed, for Joe was a very emotional girl.
You even thought of Hannah, our housekeeper.
Meg and Amy also gave Beth a hug. They, too, were feeling a little embarrassed about their selfishness. Even though the sisters had different personalities, they were very close and loved one another very much.
Girls, what is going on?
The girls had not heard Mother come home.
Mother!
They cried and ran to give her a hug. Mother's hands and cheeks were cold from the air outside, but her hugs and kisses warmed the girls up instantly. Meg quickly removed Mother's heavy coat. Joe ran to get more wood for the fire. Amy grabbed Mother's sweater, which was folded up on her chair, and gave it to her. Beth quietly brought Mother's slippers to warm her feet. As Mother sat on her chair and rubbed her hands in front of the fire, Joe told her what they'd been talking about.
We were so selfish, Mother.
Admitted Joe.
Except for Beth. She only cares about other people.
Mother smiled affectionately at each daughter and said,
I'm glad that you discovered your fault, girls. But finding our faults is only the first step. What we do with this knowledge is more important.
That evening, after a simple dinner, Mother and Hannah took inventory of the food pantry while the girls sat around the fireplace talking again.
I have some money saved up.
Joe began.
It's only a little bit, but, well, I wanted, Mother, a little gift.
She stammered.
Oh, Joe, what a lovely thought.
Beth understood right away what her sister was trying hard to express.
What's a lovely thought?
Amy asked irritably. Unlike Beth, she had no idea what Joe was trying to say.
This Christmas, none of us has much to give.
Beth explained.
But with what we do have, Joe suggests that we should all give something to Mother.
Beth smiled at Joe, who nodded enthusiastically.
That's exactly what I wanted to say, Beth.
She said gratefully. Meg and Amy both agreed it was a splendid idea. They spent the rest of the evening discussing what Mother needed and what they could give her. Although the girls would not receive gifts themselves, they were quite happy to learn the true meaning of giving. Little Women, Chapter 3, Thinking of Others. On Christmas morning, the March sisters awoke early because they wanted to surprise Mother with their gifts. Joe reached under the bed and pulled out a wooden box where the gifts for Mother were hidden.
I hope Mother likes this,
said Joe. She held up a wrapped parcel close to her heart. Joe had penned a poem just for Mother. Beth fingered her gift to Mother, 2 handkerchiefs with daisies. She had spent all night making them. Although some of the daisies looked like uneven yellow spots, Beth hoped Mother would love them.
Smell how lovely that is.
Amy pressed a small box under Meg's nose.
Did you get lavender? It's Mother's favorite.
Meg said knowingly. Amy had used her savings to buy a bottle of cologne for Mother.
Of course it's lavender, though my personal preference is roses,
said Amy.
Meg, where is your gift?
Joe lifted the wooden box and shook it hard.
Oh, I have it here,
said Meg. From her pocket, she pulled out a bundle wrapped in a silk handkerchief. Inside was a pair of white silk gloves. Joe squeezed Meg's hand. She knew that Meg had saved her hard-earned money to purchase those special gloves.
They will fit Mother's hands perfectly,
Meg said as she lovingly placed them inside the box. The girls crept quietly downstairs to the living room. Mother usually reclined in her chair sipping her coffee before the girls scurried in for breakfast. So, in order to surprise her, the girls tiptoed across the hall and stood quietly outside the living room entrance. Amy had a fit of giggles. Shh! Joe hissed at her.
Girls, on the count of 3.
Meg whispered.
1, 2, 3.
The girls flew into the room and shouted simultaneously.
Surprise, Mother! Merry!
But before they could finish their greeting, the girls noticed Mother's chair was unoccupied. Instead, Hannah had just strolled in with a tray full of cakes.
Oh!
Hannah screamed as she almost flipped the tray over. Meg ran over to help their beloved housekeeper.
Oh, girls!
Amy clasped her hands, her eyes growing big as she looked at the dining room table. The table was covered with heaps of food. There were sausages, eggs, fresh juice and butter, and cakes adorned each corner.
Your ma wanted to surprise you girls with a Christmas feast,
said Hannah, still clutching her chest and breathing deeply. The girls were so touched by their mother's loving act.
But where is she?
Asked Joe. Before Hannah could answer, Mother walked in through the front door.
Good morning, my darling girls.
Mother opened her arms wide to embrace her daughters.
Where did you go, Mother?
Meg asked.
I went to see the Hummels,
replied Mother. The Hummels were a very poor family with many small children. Mr. Hummel had been drafted into the army, leaving his pregnant wife and 6 small children to fend for themselves. Since Mother worked as a volunteer to help unfortunate people in the community, she knew the Hummel situation very well.
How are the children?
Asked Beth gently.
Not very good, I'm afraid.
Mother answered gravely.
They have no heating or food.
Her voice trailed off as she looked at the feast on the table. The girls knew what Mother was thinking, but except for Beth, the other girls were reluctant to part with their Christmas meal. Meg reasoned to herself.
We don't get any gifts. We should at least get a decent Christmas meal.
Joe was thinking.
Oh, I'm starving, and those sausages look so appetizing.
Amy contemplated.
Maybe we can eat first, then give the rest away to the Hummels.
Mother smiled at them as if she could discern their very thoughts. But she said kindly,
I just want to say that this meal is a gift from me and Hannah to you. However you want to use your gift is entirely up to you. I will love and respect you whatever you decide.
Meg spoke first.
Mother, the girls and I would be honored if the Hummels could enjoy this lovely meal.
Joe and Beth nodded in agreement. A moment or two later, Amy nodded too.
My girls, I am so proud of you,
Mother said.
Let's all go together to visit the Hummels,
Suggested Beth. So the girls sprinted upstairs to change their clothes. Within a few minutes, the food was all wrapped up and ready to go. The girls got into their boots and coats and ventured out. Each of them carried large baskets filled with food. As the Hummels did not have any heating, Joe hauled a sack of wood as well. None of the girls felt regret or resentment. Deep in their hearts, they knew the Hummels would relish the meal much more than they would. As they passed the old mansion next to their house, Joe happened to look up. From the third floor, a dark-haired boy peered down at them as they trudged along.
Look! There's old Mr. Lawrence's grandson!
Joe called out to her sisters.
Joe,
Reprimanded Meg.
stop staring at him. It isn't proper for a young girl to stare at a boy.
Ugh, don't be such a granny, Meg.
Snorted Joe. Since both her hands were full, she lifted up her foot and wiggled it at him as an alternative to waving.
Joe, you're so shameless,
Said Amy in rebuke. From the window, the boy also lifted his foot and wiggled it at Joe. Joe let out a loud, hearty laugh. No words could describe how grateful the Hummel family was for the generous gift. Joe expertly got a fire going in no time, while Meg and Amy set up the table and filled it with food. Beth and Mother took care of the sick children.
Did you see how happy those children were?
Amy said as the girls walked back home, her footsteps light and perky.
Mrs. Hummel could not stop crying.
Remarked Joe.
I felt so sorry for her.
Hopefully Mr. Hummel will be able to return home soon,
Said Mother. Silently all the girls prayed for their father to do the same. As the girls got nearer to their house, something made them stop.
Is that our house?
Asked Amy.
Well, I think so, but it looks different somehow.
Replied Meg. There was a warm glow to the house as if each room was emitting heat.
What if the house is on fire?
Joe shouted. She tore across the field, her hair flying out of its bun, and threw open the door. What a sight to behold! The entire house was cozily warm, a fire burning brightly in each fireplace. The bare dining room table was once again crowded with all sorts of delights.
Hannah, what is this?
Mother demanded to know. Choking back tears, Hannah could produce no reply, but simply pointed to the mansion next door.
You mean Mr. Lawrence sent this?
Asked Mother. Hannah nodded, overcome by a fresh wave of tears.
Here's a card.
Joe waved a small piece of paper in the air.
Dear Mrs. March and all her lovely daughters,
Joe read.
My grandson and I would like to give a gift to you as you so generously give to others. Your neighbor, Mr. Lawrence.
The girls all grabbed hands and started to dance around the table. Never had they been so surprised.
You see, girls,
Mother said happily.
when you think of others, others are also thinking of you.